People with cognitive dissonance, what they do is, so they might hold one belief. Oftentimes they'll do something contrary to the belief that they hold when faced with this dilemma, you know, of facts that contradict what is actual. And cognitive dissonance shows up in a lot of different areas, in a lot of different forms. We may have believed something for our entire life. This is a different application of cognitive dissonance. We may have believed something for our entire lives. As wrong as it was, we inherited lies and it was wrong. Now comes somebody sharing the truth, showing you the evidence, not just telling you something, but showing you the facts. Cognitive dissonance kicks in and said, you know what? The facts are there, yes, but how about this? Have you considered that the fact may not be the fact? After all, think about how things have been even before you were presented with this. You were okay even before being shown this. You called on Jesus and he healed you, right? Yeah. You saw Jesus delivered Johnny from crack addiction, right? Yeah. Verse 1. All right, Romans chapter 12, beginning at verse 1. Okay, so Yahuah was writing to the people of Yasharal who were scattered and now living in Rome. And he had this to say to them. He had this to say to them. Okay, because you see, and let me talk about the reason why he had this to say to them. He had this to say to them because they were scattered, and they were living in a lawless place. Okay, they were living in a lawless place. You see, so you know, when we study the scriptures, it's important for us to know the why, the who, the when, the where, and the how, so on and so forth. Because if we don't know these things, then we won't have an understanding really of what is being said, what the message really is. Okay, so it's important to know why. So the reason why he's saying this to them is because they were living now in a lawless place. A place, they were living among a lawless people. Okay? They were living among a lawless people in a lawless place. And there were a people who had forgotten the ways of Yahuah. They had forgotten the Torah of Yahuah. And so he had this message for them. In other words, then they had inherited themselves some lies. Okay? They themselves had inherited some lies, just as we have. And their perceptions were being shaped and formed by lawlessness or through lawlessness. So Yahuah has this to say to them. He said, I call upon you therefore, brothers, through the compassion of Elohim, to present your bodies a living offering, set apart, well-pleasing to Elohim, which is your reasonable worship. Which is your reasonable worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you prove what is that good and well-pleasing and perfect desire of Elohim. So he says, do not be conformed to this world or to that system, that government that you're under, that way of life, that thinking, that lawless thinking. Do not be conformed to it, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you prove what is that good and well-pleasing and perfect desire of Elohim. So this is a very important message. As it was then, so it is now. That we are not to be conformed to this world, to the way of thinking of this world, the way of thinking and teachings of the lawless one, but we must be transformed by the renewing of our minds. So you see, we need a renewal. We need a renewal. Our minds must be renewed. And our minds are being renewed. Our minds are being renewed as Yahuah continued to unveil and to reveal his truth and to expose the lies that we have inherited. Now there are a couple of hindrances to this renewal taking place. There are a couple of things that can hinder this renewal. Not just a couple, really, a few. But I want to talk about a couple. And I'm going to mention one that I'm not really going to get into, but the elephant in the room is pride. Pride can be and is a great hindrance to this renewal taking place. So Shahu was writing to Yasharal, who were scattered and they were now living among a lawless people. And he was saying to them that you must offer your bodies a living worship unto Yahuah. And also, in order to do that, you must renew your mind. Do not be conformed, but be transformed by the renewing, through the renewing of your mind. And the way your mind is renewed is through the word of Yahuah. The scriptures calls it, his word, water. It washes us also. Okay, so pride is a hindrance to that. But there are a couple other things. You see, when we have inherited lies, there are a couple other things that has an impact. And these things in some ways have been designed. They are strategic. Shalom to you, Aki Hariyahu, and welcome back, Aki. Okay, these things are designed. They are strategic. Okay, they are strategic. One of them is this. You've heard of the Stockholm Syndrome, right? I think we have all heard of the Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome was named after a young lady who... You're welcome, Daki. Okay. The Stockholm Syndrome was named after a young lady who was held captive. I think actually the way it happened, they had robbed a bank. And they took her as a, she was a worker at the bank. They took her as an hostage. And they threatened her that she saw them, she saw who they were, but they threatened her that she, if she should say anything, they knew where she lived and so on, and they were going to kill her. And so something kicked in, and it was the basically self-preservation kicked in. Self-preservation kicked in. And so even though those who held her against her will, threatened her with death, and was not nice to her, what she began to do was she eventually became a protector of them. Okay, so the people who abused her, she fell in love with, even though they were not ever loving to her or toward her. Okay, so she fell in love with her captor. She fell in love with her abuser. And when I say fell in love, not romantically, but what I'm saying is to the degree that she would go, there is no degree that she wouldn't go. No problem, Aki, welcome, great to see you. There is no degree that she would not go to protect them. But you see, the reason why she did that to begin with was because she was threatened. So now it's a matter of preserving self. But for the person who don't know this, looking, they actually thought for a time that she was a part of the scheme, a part of the robbery, because of her behavior. Now, they named this syndrome after her, and many people since her have been diagnosed with that syndrome. So a person who have been held captive, yes, it's the mindset of some people in this captivity. Absolutely a quote. So, you know, after, for some people, they have been held captive against their will, and during that captivity they were exposed to threats and harsh treatments. And so in an effort to preserve themselves, self-preservation, to keep them from getting killed, they formed this love, or which wasn't really a love, but it was just their way of trying to make sure that the one who has the power over them don't become so angry that he would destroy them. They formed this thing for that person. Yes, it's a survival, what you would call it. Can't call it you could call it a tactic, but it's more sinister than a tactic, because people do it. Instinct. Yes, Aki, thank you. It's a survival instinct, you know. And over the years, so many people have fallen to that. But, you know, a people as a whole, black people who have been enslaved, suffer from that syndrome. So you have people in church, I'm talking about especially black people in church, who, when you try to share certain truths with them, whether it's about their history or the scriptures, they will defend the lies of their masters at all cost. You see? That's the Stockholm syndrome. That's symptoms of the Stockholm syndrome. But it started out innocently. It started out of a need to self-preserve. That's how it started out. Out of a felt need that if I don't act a certain way, I'm going to be killed. I'm going to be destroyed. And so I must act the way I know I'm expected to act in order to preserve my life. But the problem with the Stockholm syndrome is that if left untreated, that mindset will forever go on. So this young lady who was subjected to that, it's not like she just acted that way for a moment. It became a part of her. She really believed that these people were good and should be protected at all cost. You see? That's the Stockholm syndrome in a nutshell. Yes. So now, yes, a survival mechanism. Absolutely, Akut. So you have the Stockholm syndrome. And that is where people fall, you know, they fall in love with their captor and will protect their captor and the lives of their captor at all cost. We've got to be careful that we do not, and we have suffered from that, believe it or not. You know, all of us are captors to all of us were captors to Shaitan, because you see, at the end of the day, it's not about a man at the end of the day. No, it's not. It's not about a man at the end of the day. You know, you come to this room and I know, maybe, I don't know if anybody get tired of hearing me talking about the history of our people and so on, but really, please understand that I'm not stuck on any man. I realize that the warfare that we fight, it is not fleshly, but it is a spiritual warfare. It's the kingdom of Yah against the kingdom of Shaitan. Okay? That's the war we're in. It is Shaitan seeking to destroy a people. So I recognize that it goes beyond flesh and blood. You see? And in that regards, remember, Yasharal is not limited to the natural seed of Yasharal, but to any that would cleave to Yahuah's covenant. So you see, anyone that is of Yasharal have been engulfed in a battle. The nature of the battle might be different, the way it's played out in the physical. But in the spiritual realm, it comes down to one thing. It comes down to who will own you. It comes down to who you will serve. That's what it comes down to. Yes, absolutely, Coat Elizabeth. Even some battered women do. Absolutely. Many battered women. Absolutely. Absolutely. Praise Yah. Praise Yah. Yes, many battered women do. Absolutely. Okay, so at the end of the day, it really comes down to Shaitan seeking to fight against the seed of Yahuah. That's really what it comes down to. You know? Alright, so you have the Stockholm Syndrome, and all of us, you can talk to people. Now, black people got it bad. But you can talk to people of all races, and you will find that while it's not a matter of them being being abused by a physical captor, a man, and a system, they are been penned up, locked up, abused, blinded by Shaitan, and you can't tell them no different. It's really harder to reach somebody who haven't really been through anything, really. You know, as far as being oppressed by a system, being stigmatized, and just have been done wrong everywhere around. It's really harder. And you know what? The truth is too, that it's hard for those people to see that some, not all, but it's hard for some of those people to see that this is being done or has been done or was done to people of other nationalities around them. And oftentimes the attitude is, just get over it. It's easy for you to say just get over it when you don't know nothing about it, never experienced it, and don't even realize that it continues today. But to experience it and then to know that it continues is something else. You know, but we've got to be careful of the Stockholm Syndrome. Be careful that we don't fall in love with the devil, with Shaitan and his lies, okay? He abuses us, tortures us, he molests us. Then we turn around and fall in love with him and protect him at all cost. So from a spiritual perspective, we've got to be careful that we don't develop that syndrome. Okay? Don't fall in love with his lies. Okay? The next thing that we should be aware of is this. You know, my wife and I, we were studying psychology because of become an administrator for a daycare. We were trying to open up a building, and we wanted to be our own administrator. So we were studying, and one of the courses that you have to take is psychology. Well, what I learned in my studies in psychology, I learned a lot. In psychology, a lot of it is foolishness, and a lot of it is scientifically true. There's a lot of science involved that is factual, that is true. Okay, now some people preach, you know, in churches, a lot of church sermons are based on psychological studies and not the scriptures. I don't know if you realize that, but it is. A whole lot of things in church are based around psychological studies. They really study people, okay, and prey on people's behavior. All right. Psychology is the study of human behavior. You know, put it in a nutshell, that's what it is. The study of human behavior. Okay? Yes, absolutely okay. Psychology basically is the study of human behavior. It can be from a social perspective, a scientific perspective, a medical perspective. It covers a whole lot of things, but it is the study of human behavior. Okay? Now, as I was studying psychology, I learned something about a disorder called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. I'm going to write it. Of course, the word cognitive comes from being able to understand what's going on around you, you know, being able to relate to your environment. But I learned about this thing called cognitive dissonance. It's a disorder. Okay? And all of us suffer from it. It's a disorder that all of us suffer from. And until Yahuah open our eyes, we can continue to suffer from it. But when Yahuah open our eyes, you see, to overcome cognitive dissonance, the cure to me, as I look at cognitive dissonance, I believe that the cure for cognitive dissonance is simple humility. It's for us to be able to be humble. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Now, I'd forgotten about cognitive dissonance until a few weeks ago. My wife was watching a video, a set of videos on YouTube, and there was a lady there talking about cognitive dissonance, and it reminded me of that. And I actually shared some of those videos on the website. Cognitive dissonance. What is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance is a behavior in which, if you have a belief or you have something that you have believed your entire life, for example, and then you come in contact with facts that goes contrary to this long-held belief, then we sometimes, most times, not knowing what we do, our mind says that, okay, we've got to do something. Something have got to change. Okay, something has to change. I have this belief that I've held on to my entire life. And that's all I've known. As a matter of fact, it didn't just start with me. This is the way my grandmother did it. My grandfather did it. My great-grandmother, great-grandfather, great-great-great, on and on. This has always been, so how can it be wrong? I mean, this is the truth. But then we are shown evidence that even though this has been around for centuries, then it doesn't mean that it is true. And you're shown evidence that shows you that no, that's not true. That wasn't true. Now, a humble person will say, you know what? I've believed a lie all this time and I must turn away from it. But where there is pride, you know what pride does? Pride will not allow us to simply walk away from something that we have held forever. Pride will say, nah, I've got to justify this somehow. In spite of the facts that exist, in spite of the evidence that I've seen, my great-grandmom have always done this and taught this and walked this and lived this and taught this to us. Certainly she can't be wrong. They can't be wrong. And so pride says, and because I'm not humble enough to say, you know what, I was wrong. Because ultimately what it comes down to, what it comes down to is not even about grandmother or great-grandmother or grandmother's three generations down the road. It's really not about that. Really what it comes down to is us. Are we willing to say, you know what, I was wrong? Are we humble enough to say that? Or are we too concerned with our image? The image that seeks to convey that, you know what, I was never wrong about anything. I've always known that, you know, this is that or that is that. Are we more concerned with the image? So to keep up that image, I'm going to just sweep the facts, the truth under the carpet. And I'm going to continue to do what I've always done. Believe what I've always believed? Or am I going to say, you know what? Okay, I see the evidence. Now I must admit that I was in error and turn. And now, people with cognitive dissonance, what they do is, so they might hold one belief. Oftentimes they'll do something contrary to the belief that they hold when faced with this dilemma, you know, of facts that contradict what is actual. And cognitive dissonance shows up in a lot of different areas, in a lot of different forms. I guess I could give you one example of cognitive dissonance in just a simple, realistic form. I'm going to use it in this way. It would be different in dealing with scriptural truth, but I'm going to give you one example that everybody could probably relate to. Not relate to in that was me, but you probably know of somebody who has been in this situation. Okay. Yes, we in harmony with no conflicts. Absolutely, Akut. Absolutely. Yes, don't rock the boat. Yes. Yes, indeed. Okay. So when the boats start rocking, cognitive dissonance say that you've got to do something to stop the rocking. And that something may be to make excuses for the facts that you're presented with. So when you present the truth to people today concerning anything from the name of Yah to his laws or anything like that, they say, oh, you know how they excuse that? Cognitive dissonance kicks in and they say, oh, you're a cult, you're this, you're that. They try to make excuses because even though the evidence is in their face, they want to hold on to what they've always known and heard and believed, even though it's false. And so something have got to change. And so very often truth is what paid the price in this disorder. With this disorder, truth often pays the price and not the falsehood. The falsehood should pay the price, but oftentimes it doesn't. Okay, another example of cognitive dissonance, we find it in relationships. This is different from what I'm talking about. Again, it shows up in different ways in different situations. I'm just giving you another situation of how it would show up. Another way cognitive dissonance shows up in relationships, for example, is this. I'm just giving an example here. Say you have a man or a woman who is very, you know, they do well. They're very responsible financially. You know, they're very responsible financially. And this is an example given even in the psychological dictionary for cognitive dissonance. But again, it has different applications in different situations. I'm just using this one for example. You have a woman, for example, who is very disciplined financially, but then she meets a man who, you know, in her eyes he is the right height, he has the right look, the right complexion, the right this, the right that, everything is right, but he has one problem. He's a spendthrift. He cannot hold on to a dime. He spends what he doesn't have. Her, on the other hand, she is disciplined in managing her money. She manages her finances well. But she meets Mr. Right, wannabe Mr. Right. Shalom to you, Precious Davidson. Shalom and welcome. She meets, this guy that she wants desperately to be Mr. Right. And Mr. Right is right, except he is off in an area that is most bothering and troublesome to her. Because a woman who is disciplined in managing her finances cannot stand a man who is undisciplined in managing his, or vice versa. It's a difficult thing when you're disciplined in one area and you have somebody who's just totally loose in that area. It creates great conflict. And she perhaps had convinced herself, she had told herself over the years that I will never marry a man who is wasteful and who does not manage his money well. But here it is, she finds this guy that she desperately wants to be Mr. Right. And everything is right except when it comes to his money, managing his money. And so, cognitive dissonance kicks in. And she begins to rationalize. Even though she knows that it is possible that this guy that I desperately want to be Mr. Right, even though she knows that it is possible that he could very well take me down with him because he is too loose in managing his finances, cognitive dissonance kicks in and she begins to rationalize. She begins to focus. She makes a decision that, you know what? That's not so important after all. I'm just going to look at all the things I like about him. I like his hair. I like his eyes. I like his height. I like his complexion. I like his smile. I like the way he laughs. I like the way he makes me laugh. I even like the way he cooks. I like the way he, take care of me, care for me, all of this. So she's decided, cognitive dissonance kicks in, and she said, cognitive dissonance say, listen, even though you know that she could take you down, praise Yahuah, even though you know that he could be your destruction, even though you know that he could, because of his behavior when it comes to finances, he may be a gambler, even though you know that his behavior is reckless, cognitive dissonance says, oh, you can live with that. You can live with that. And so when cognitive dissonance says you can live with that, then you say, you know what? You're right. I'm just going to focus on the things I like. And guess what? The thing with cognitive dissonance is cognitive dissonance don't tell you, well, you know what? You can focus on the things you like, but at the same time, you must work on the things you don't like. No, cognitive dissonance don't do that. Cognitive dissonance, that's why it's a disorder. Cognitive dissonance say, just focus on the things you like. Ignore what you don't like. But does ignoring the problem fix the problem? No, it does not. It doesn't fix the problem. It just makes you think that the problem don't exist anymore, or the problem is not as important as you thought it was. Okay? So, now, that same disorder affects us when it comes to the truth also. We may have believed something for our entire life. This is a different application of cognitive dissonance. We may have believed something for our entire lives. As wrong as it was, we inherited lies and it was wrong. Now comes somebody sharing the truth, showing you the evidence, not just telling you something, but showing you the facts. Cognitive dissonance kicks in and said, you know what? The facts are there, yes, but how about this? Have you considered that the fact may not be the fact? After all, think about how things have been even before you were presented with this. You were okay even before being shown this. You called on Jesus and he healed you, right? Yeah. You saw Jesus delivered Johnny from crack addiction, right? Yeah. And over there he's telling you that, you know, this guy whose name is not Jesus, but he is the Messiah, is named Yahusha. This guy says that the law is not done away with, but the Jesus who delivered Johnny and answered your prayers, he said the law is done away with. And, you know, doesn't it feel better not living under that burden? And you say, yeah, you know, you're right. And so what do? We take another look and we look back over there at the facts and we say, you know, I hear what you're saying, but my life have been all right without you. So, you know, I'm just going to make excuses. I'm going to excuse you away. But, you know, we can make excuses all we want, but the facts remain the facts. And the problem is, family, that a whole lot of people continue to hold on to lies, inherited lies, because even though the facts have been shown to them, they have made excuses as a result of cognitive dissonance. They have rationalized. They have rationalized away the facts, and they continue to uphold lies. Well, Scriptures ask the question, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and then to lose his being? Then to be destroyed, then to be condemned. What does it profit a man? When the truth is presented, if we cannot see it for what it is and be humble enough to accept it, we have made a choice for destruction. Scriptures lets us know that sin is pleasurable, but only for a moment, and that moment may be long. Yep, because Yahuah is patient. He is patient, and that's what's dangerous about Yahuah in this covenant that we're in. There was a time when he would strike you dead. You mess up. But now, he is giving you time to get it together. But some people, instead of taking the time to get it together, they're just sliding into darkness. Because it seemed like I did this yesterday and nothing happened, so I could do it again. And every day they go to do, they do more. It's like a bank robber who robbed a bank the first time and wasn't caught. Every time he robs a bank and don't get caught, he gets bolder. Eventually he'll get caught. So it is with Yahuah. So I just say this, and I talk about these things as we prepare to go into this study, because I want it to be at the forefront of our minds that we are affected by these behaviors. We are affected by these behaviors. And oftentimes the truth is presented, and what hinders us from acknowledging the truth are these very behaviors that we spoke about. One, we must recognize that we have all inherited lies. Two, we must be willing to put away pridefulness. Three, we must recognize that we all have suffered and could continue to suffer from the Stockholm syndrome. And three, we are also all prone and maybe have suffered from cognitive dissonance. Now, once we recognize that, it's for us to say, you know what, I don't want no part of that mess anymore. And so I'm going to test all things, prove all things. Let the scriptures do the talking. Let it speak to me, and whatever it says, I will do. Whatever it says, I will do. Okay, so we're going to our study on Passover. It's certainly a quote. One is the fact that we have all inherited lies. We have all inherited lies. Yes, absolutely, Akut. The truth can be difficult to face. Have to ask for Yah's strength. Absolutely. Halal Huyah. So true, Akut. That's so true. So we have all inherited lies. That's one. Two, we must be willing to demolish pride, put down pride, destroy pride. We must be willing to demolish pride, all pridefulness. If we fail to do that, we'll just be stuck in a lie. We'll never be able to turn from it because we don't never want anybody to think that we were ever wrong or could ever be wrong. But all of us have been wrong. All of us have been wrong. Next is understanding that we all have suffered from the Stockholm Syndrome. That's Stockholm. The Stockholm Syndrome. We have all suffered from the Stockholm Syndrome. It has affected us all. And if we're not careful, it can still continue to affect us. Pride can cause it to continue to have its effect on us. The Stockholm Syndrome. And four, that four? Yes, four. Recognize also that we have all suffered from cognitive dissonance and could continue to suffer from it. Again, we don't humble ourselves. Being willing to search out a matter thoroughly, testing all things like the Bereans, when we find it to be so, being willing to say, you know what, I was wrong. And if I've taught anybody wrong, Yahuah, forgive me, I repent. And if I can reach out to those people and tell them that, you know what, I taught you wrong, then I will do that. Coming out of church, I did that. I had to do that. Because for too long I preached lies to people. And I send them emails. I try to reach them by every way that I could to tell them I lied to you. They didn't want to hear it. You know what their response was? This is basically what their response was. You're a liar for telling me you lied all that time. That was their response. To sum it up, that was their response. I'm a liar for saying to them that I've lied to them all that time. And that's sad. I didn't have a problem telling them, though, that I lied to them because I was more fearful of Yahuah than of what their response would be to me. Praise Yahuah. Yep, so we have all suffered from cognitive dissonance, and if we're not careful, we could be suffering from it right now. And we could suffer from it tomorrow or sometime in the future if we're not careful. Be on guard. Okay? Praise Yah. You're welcome, Dakota. Praise Yahuah. And so with that said, let's really get into what we're trying to get to. Passover. Passover.